International, Ray Klinginsmith, and when I was preparing for this meeting, I had opportunity to look up on the Rotary webpage. I thought I would get just a little bit of background information so I could share some information about Ray with you. And I guess if I were to just outline the information, in itself would take up our whole meeting. So I'm going to make it a little bit shorter than that and just share with you that Ray has been a Rotarian for over 50 years. And by the way, he does have a Gallatin connection with his Rotary membership. And so I think I'm going to just leave it at that, and I'll let him share the rest of the information with you. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Ray Klinginsmith.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back in Gallatin. This is my third visit to your club that I can remember, and it may have been more than that. But to show you the Gallatin connection, when I had just been selected as a Rotary Scholar to study in South Africa, the district conference was held before I went abroad in Unionville. And one of the people I distinctly remember meeting was Randy Brandon from Gallatin and Catherine. He already had more than 30 years of perfect attendance in 1959 when I met him. So, and he went on to have 60 years of perfect attendance. In fact, Brandy and Catherine, not only did Brandy have 60 years perfect attendance, they never missed a district conference in 60 years. Now that is just remarkable. And so it's good that he has the name on the bell, but you know why his name's on the bell? It's because he gave it to the club. You know, nearly all Rotary clubs in all countries do have bells and gavels. And there's a great story by Herb Pigman, who later became General Secretary, the head job of Rotary International. He worked there for about 35 years. But when he was a student at Franklin College in northern Indiana, he was being considered applying for a job to work at Rotary International as a cub reporter for the Rotarian magazine. But he didn't know anything about Rotary, except that he knew the Rotary Club met at a certain restaurant where his fiancée, Betty, worked, waited table. And so he said to Betty, "What do you know about the Rotary Club?" And she said, "Well, all I know is they're controlled by a bell." He said when they come in, they stand around, they talk, and the president hits the bell, and they all sit down. Then they have the meal, and he rings the bell again, they all shut up. And then at the end of the meeting, he rings the bell again, they all wake up. That's the bell in Rotary. You know, I can recall that when I returned from being a Rotary Scholar in South Africa, the district governor was Dr. Cecil Compton in Cameron. And he said to me, "Ray, you know, we've had Rotary Scholars come back. The program had been in place then for about 14 years, but they don't get around to the clubs. Would you be interested in visiting the clubs in the district?" And I said, "Of course I would, because I understand that's part of the program." He said, "Well, we've got a little extra money in the budget." That's unusual for a Rotary district. But he said, "We'll pay you, for every club that invites you, we'll pay you 10 cents a mile to travel from Unionville to the club. And we'll give you a $10 honorarium." Wow, $10 in 1961 was equivalent to about 100 now. So I spoke to about 22 out of the 29 clubs in the district. I had a great experience, and Gallatin was one of those clubs, and at that time we were meeting down at McDonald's Tea Room. So that was a real treat to go there in 1961. Then in the mid-'80s, when I was on the board of directors for Rotary International, I was invited to speak at your club. You were still meeting at McDonald's at that time. And Frank Baldwin, who was a past district governor in Kirksville, drove me over here because I was busy and I never had time to think about what I wanted to say at a Rotary Club meeting. So Frank would drive me to the various meetings I was invited to attend. In fact, it got so, that's Carl and Charlie's father. Frank brought me over here, and it got to the point whenever I would call Frank, he would say, well, where are we going today? He was my driver. We came here, and we were still meeting at the McDonald's tea room, although it wasn't quite the same experience it had been earlier. And so it's good to be back here the third time. Now, after I returned from South Africa as a Rotary student and finished law school, I went to Macon to practice, where Jack Briggs was the editor of the newspaper. So Jack ran the town. And not only did he run the town, he also had an absolutely complete collection of all the Playboy magazines that had ever been published. Still got it. So it's good to see Jack again. Now, what is it that might be of interest to you that's going on in Rotary International? There's a lot happening. But I want to cover a couple of things quickly, and then if we have time, I want to take questions, because there's usually some interest in knowing, well, what's it like to be president of Rotary International? I can tell you it's a great thrill and tremendous honor. When I was first selected as president, I bumped into a lady that I know in church. She's not a Rotarian, but I saw her at the post office, and she said, "Ray, congratulations on being selected as president of Rotary. How many Rotary clubs are there in the world?" I said, "There are 34,000 clubs." And she said, "Oh my God, you have to visit all of them?" I didn't make it. But let me tell you a little bit about our corporate project, the polio eradication. The reason I want you to be sure that you at least have some basic knowledge about that is that we're just so close to finishing the job. And when we do finish the job and eradicate polio, it is going to be so significant that Rotarians all over the world need to know how much credit Rotary is due. And I just want to quickly give you the background so you'll have that basic framework. In 1978, Klinginsmith from Australia was the president. And he thought we were growing 3% a year. We grew for 5 decades at the rate of 3% a year. And we were becoming a real force in the world. We were approaching 1 million members in the late 70s. And Clem thought that we ought to have a big project that would give Rotary some visibility, because all the work was being done in the clubs. And at that time, it was even thought that clubs should not claim credit for what they did. And so Clem asked all the Rotary clubs in the world to send in $15 a member. And enough of them did that we suddenly had $7 million to use toward charitable projects. And there was a wonderful ophthalmologist in the Philippines named Benny Santos, and those of us who knew him called him Saint Benny. He was such a wonderful person. And he suggested that the first corporate project should be to immunize all the children in the Philippines against polio, because they had the highest incidence of polio in the Pacific. So we spent $600,000 immunizing all the children in the Philippines. And we did it the way that Dr. Albert Sabin had said we should do it. And that is, you immunize every child in the country on the same weekend. Labor intensive, but there are no health records, so you don't know who's already been immunized, and you won't know a year from now who's been immunized. So you do them all on the same weekend. We did that in the Philippines, and the incidence of polio plummeted. So then we tried it in the Gambia, in Bolivia, and in Sierra Leone. It worked every time. The rate went way down. So we developed this wild idea in the mid-'80s that we would immunize all the children in the world against polio. And what was it going to cost at 4 cents a dose? It was going to cost $120 million. Now, the only money Rotary had ever raised as a corporate entity was $7 million. And suddenly we were told we needed 120 million. But we undertook the effort, not knowing whether we could succeed in raising that much money or not. And at the end of 3 years, it was a 3-year fundraising campaign, we hadn't raised 120 million, we had raised 247 million. Isn't that just astounding? The generosity of Rotarians for a good cause. Well, at that point, we had reduced the number of cases from 500,000. When we started, 500,000 cases a year, 50,000 deaths. Now, for those of you who are as old as Jack Briggs and me, all of you will be familiar with someone in your community that was affected by polio. It was a scourge before it was controlled in this country. And so we set out. We had reduced the cases from 500,000 to 350,000. At that point, the World Health Organization said, hey, these guys are not just a bunch of do-gooders, they're a bunch of do-gooders that have a bankroll, 247 million. So they took us on as a partner, along with UNICEF, Centers for Disease Control. We've been the 4 spearheading partners in the eradication of polio since 1988. We've worked together. We have reduced the incidence of polio from 120 countries to 3, and we have reduced the number of cases from 350,000 in 1988 to last year 600, this year 148. We're getting so close when you think about the magnitude of the numbers. And when we get to that final case, you need to know Rotary's role. Our partners, World Health Organization, UNICEF, Centers for Disease Control, say we would never have done this without Rotary. Not only do they have the people on the ground to administer the vaccines, but they're the catalysts. They're the ones that wouldn't say quit when the going was tough. So we are recognized by these high-level international NGOs, governmental organizations, as the catalyst that is going to eradicate only the second disease in the history of the world. The other one was smallpox, which was much easier to eradicate because everyone had smallpox, had pox on the face, you could tell. With polio, we have people who have the polio virus in their bodies. It doesn't affect them, they don't have any manifestation, but they excrete the virus. It goes into the sewer system and affects other people. So it's been very difficult. We didn't know when we started in 1985 on a serious effort to eradicate polio that it would take us more than 30 years. It has, but it's been worth it. Now, Rotary International at the corporate level is gearing up to claim our fair share of the credit. But you know, with 34,000 clubs, it's not what happens at the corporate level that's important. It's what happens at the club level. And so for all the clubs that are represented here today, I just want you to be aware of the great thing that Rotary has been involved in. And, you know, we can set in clubs in small towns like Gallatin. We can make contributions to the Rotary Foundation. And voila, good things happen. Magnificent things happen. That's the power of the connection that we have with 34,000 clubs in 200 countries, 1.2 million members. And we're a part of it in our small towns. My guess is that Gallatin is much like Unionville, where I grew up. When I was going to high school in the 50s, we had every new car dealership in town. We had all the implement companies. Now there are none. Chances are you're in about the same boat. When I won the Rotary Scholarship, the Rotary Club of Unionville was 60 members. Now it's 25. My guess is you've had similar attrition because the climate of the town has changed. But what I want to say to you, it's worth the work. In a smaller club, the same people do all the jobs. But it's worth it to be a part of this network that is about to eradicate only the second disease in history. And you know, Rotarians have, in the last 30 years, out of their own pockets, not counting the Gates here, contributed more than $1 billion to polio eradication. $1 billion with a B. But do you know, the good news, in my mind, the clubs and the Lords, every year, do you know what they spend on community service projects? Every year? $1 billion. Think of the magnitude of what Rotary clubs do by name. They may consider them a small cog in a big machine, but it's those small cogs that are important. That makes the whole thing run. In fact, surveys show that the reason people join Rotary, 2 reasons. 1 is to help the community, and 2 is the friendship and fellowship of the other Rotarians. So keep in mind that your community projects are what you'll be judged by here in the Gallatin community, or in Cameron and Bethany and the other towns that are represented here. So it's community service that gets us moving. That and a friendly atmosphere and some really good food. That helps a little bit too. My father was a Rotarian. The Unionville Club met on Thursdays. And I can remember every Thursday evening at the dinner table, we heard how bad the food was. So you don't have that problem. So you should be a highly successful club. So we don't have much time for questions. Just let me end up with citing you a study that was done by the School of Journalism at Northwestern. Jack went to the MU journalism school, and he thinks it's the best in the world. But Northwestern now has a very fine journalism school, and some graduate students wanted to do a case study of Rotary International. They wanted to learn more about it. They wanted to tell us what they found. So in the case study, they told us a number of things that we do that young people do not find attractive in a service club. Some of those we already knew. But their conclusion was that Rotary is a worldwide network of inspired individuals who translate their passions into relevant social causes to change lives in communities. Isn't that a brilliant statement and a great tribute to what we can do by meeting in 34,000 different Rotary clubs every week? We are a network of inspired individuals who translate their passions into relevant social causes to change lives in communities. Rotary, not only around the world, but in communities like this, are making the world a better place. And the good news is, not only are we making the world a better place, we do it better than anybody else.